She thought the hardest thing she'd ever do was smile through another dinner party while her husband looked through her like glass. She was wrong. The hardest thing was standing in her own kitchen, holding a coffee mug she'd bought for two, listening to the man she married say the words open marriage like he was suggesting a new restaurant. 3 years. She gave him 3 years of her life, and he gave her a business proposal in return. If you've ever loved someone who made you feel like you were slowly disappearing, stay with me. This story is for you. Hit like, drop your city in the comments, and let's see how far Emma's story travels. The coffee had gone cold again. Emma Rossi noticed it the way she noticed most things these days. Too late, after it already stopped mattering. She was sitting at the kitchen table in their Chelsea apartment, the one with the cracked tile near the stove that Marco had promised to fix 17 months ago and never did. The morning light came through the window at a flat, indifferent angle, the kind that didn't flatter anything. It landed on the stack of unpaid invoices near her laptop, on the ring of dried wine from last night's glass, on her hands, ink stained at the knuckles from the illustration project she'd been grinding through since 2 a.m, because sleep had stopped being reliable somewhere around month 4 of whatever this marriage had quietly become. She was 26 years old, and she felt ancient. Marco was still in the bedroom. She could hear him moving, the particular rhythm of a man getting ready who didn't feel the need to be quiet about it. Drawers opening and closing, the shower running too long, his phone buzzing twice, then a third time, and she noticed she didn't feel anything about that anymore. Not suspicion, not curiosity, just a flat gray nothing that frightened her more than jealousy ever could have. She picked up the cold coffee and drank it anyway. That was Emma Rossi in those days. She drank cold coffee. She said fine when people asked how she was. She laughed at the right moments at dinner parties and stayed up until 3 a.m., finishing design work for clients who paid late and complimented her talent like it was a pleasant surprise. She had learned to make herself very small and very useful, and to not take up too much space in any room, including the rooms of her own life. Marco came out of the bedroom looking like he always looked. Good. Marco always looked good. That was one of the first things she had noticed about him, back when noticing things about him had felt like a privilege. Dark hair, sharp jaw, the kind of easy confidence that filled a room without trying. He poured himself a coffee without glancing at her and stood at the counter scrolling through his phone, and Emma watched him the way you watch something through a window. Present, but separate. You working today? He asked, not looking up. I have the Hargrove project, and Sophie needs me for the gala setup tonight. The catering thing. Yes, the catering thing. He made a sound that wasn't quite agreement, and wasn't quite dismissal, just a sound. She had a whole dictionary of his sounds by now. This one meant I heard you, and I'm already thinking about something else. She should have let it go. She always let it go. You didn't come home until 2, she said instead. He did look up then, not with guilt, just with the mild expression of a man who had been mildly inconvenienced. I told you, client dinner. You texted me at 11 that you were leaving. Traffic. She looked at him. He looked back. 3 years of marriage lived in the silence between those 2 words, and none of it was good anymore. Marco? Emma. He set the phone down, and something in the way he said her name made the cold coffee turn to lead in her stomach. She knew that tone. She had been waiting for that tone for months without letting herself know that's what she was doing. We should talk. She didn't say anything. Tonight's probably not the night, with the gala and everything, but this week. He picked his phone back up. We need to talk. She nodded once. He left 20 minutes later without kissing her goodbye. That had stopped being strange 3 months ago. She sat at the table for another 10 minutes after the door closed, not moving, not crying, just breathing, in and out. The cracked tile near the stove caught the light in a way that made it look worse than it was. She closed her laptop, picked up her bag, and went to help her sister feed Manhattan's finest. Sophie's catering operation ran out of a commercial kitchen in Hell's Kitchen that smelled permanently of garlic and industrial cleaning solution. And Sophie herself ran it with the controlled frenzy of someone who had made peace with chaos by becoming its master. She was 31, 4 inches shorter than Emma, twice as loud, and one of the few people on Earth who could look at Emma's face and immediately know something was wrong without being told. "You look terrible," Sophie said by way of greeting, handing Emma an apron without breaking stride. "Good morning to you too." "I mean it, your eyes are doing that thing." "What thing?" "The thing where you're looking at something that isn't in the room." Sophie stopped and actually looked at her, which was worse than not being looked at. "What did he do?" "Nothing. I'm fine." "Emma." "Sophie, I need you to not do this right now. Tell me what you need me to do." Sophie held her gaze for 2 more seconds, the maternal 2 seconds that only older sisters could manufacture, and then made the pragmatic decision that the Whitmore Gala didn't care about anyone's marriage problems. "Canapés, table 6 layout, and try not to drop anything. This crowd tips based on aesthetics." The Whitmore Gala was held on the 43rd floor of a building on Park Avenue that made no apologies for what it was. Old money, new money, money so comfortable with itself it didn't need to announce anything. The ballroom had marble floors and ceiling lights designed to make everyone look slightly better than they deserved, and by 8 o'clock it was full of people whose names Emma half recognized from magazine covers and financial news segments she absorbed by accident. She moved through it like a ghost. That was the job, to be present without being seen, to keep the champagne flutes full and the canapé trays circulating, and to smile pleasantly if anyone made eye contact and then disappear again. She was good at it. She had been practicing the art of tasteful invisibility for years. It was while navigating around a cluster of men in suits near the East Corridor, tray balanced, eyes forward, measuring the geometry of the crowd the way she'd learned to do, that she miscalculated. Someone moved. She couldn't even say who. One moment she had her path, and the next the floor shifted on her, the heel of her left shoe finding the microscopic seam between 2 marble tiles at exactly the wrong angle. The tray tilted. Her body tilted with it. 3 years of trying to stay balanced while everything around her slowly gave way, and it was a tile seam in a Park Avenue ballroom that finally took her feet out from under her. She didn't hit the floor. She didn't hit the floor because a hand caught her. Not her arm, but her waist, firm and sudden and completely steady, pulling her upright before her knees had even registered what was happening. The tray was gone. She heard it somewhere to her left, but she was standing. Someone had her. She looked up. He was young, younger than she would have expected, maybe 30 or 31, with dark eyes that weren't warm exactly, but were intensely, uncomfortably attentive. Dark suit, no tie. The kind of face that didn't ask for permission to be looked at. He wasn't smiling, but he wasn't not smiling either. He was just looking at her with an expression she couldn't immediately categorize, which unsettled her because she was good at categorizing people. "You okay?" he said. Simple, direct, no performance in it. "Yes?" Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Thank you. I'm sorry. I don't know what happened with the—" "Don't apologize." She blinked. "You almost fell," he said. "There's nothing to apologize for." The people around them had mostly looked away already. This city had a gift for that, the collective agreement to not witness anything inconvenient. But he was still looking at her, and it wasn't the way people usually looked at catering staff, which was to say slightly past or slightly through. He was looking directly at her face, like he was reading something. "I should find the tray," she said. "Someone already got it." And indeed, one of his associates or staff or whoever they were had materialized and was handling it with practiced efficiency. He still hadn't let go of her waist. He seemed to realize this at the same moment she did. He let go. "Dante Valente," he said. She knew the name. Barely. She didn't follow finance or business press closely enough for it to be more than a half memory. But something about it stuck. The way certain words stick not because of what they mean, but because of the weight with which they're said. He said his own name like a statement of fact. Not pride, just fact. Emma Rossi. He nodded once. Around them the gala moved and gleamed, and the conversations folded over each other in that particular way of rooms where everyone is performing for someone. He seemed entirely outside of it, like the room was happening near him rather than including him. "Do you need a minute?" he asked. "No, I'm fine." "Fine. The word she said 100 times a day until it stopped meaning anything. Thank you again. Really. She collected herself, found Sophie's eye across the room, gave the small nod that meant I'm handling it, and turned to go. Emma. She stopped. He was already reaching into his jacket. He held out a card. Not a business card exactly, smaller, with only a number on it. No name, no title. In case you want breakfast, he said. Sometime, no obligation. She stared at the card, then at him. I don't, she started. I know, he said, and there was something in those two words that told her he actually did. Whatever I know meant in this context, that she was working, that she was married, that this was strange, that she was somewhere she had not been for a long time and wasn't sure she was ready for. He seemed to hold it all without asking her to explain any of it. Just in case. She took the card. She didn't know why. He walked back into the room, and people moved around him the way water moves around a stone. Not because he forced it, but because something in the way he existed required it. Emma put the card in her apron pocket and went back to work. She didn't tell Sophie. She almost did, 3 separate times on the drive back to the kitchen. But each time she opened her mouth, something stopped her. Not embarrassment, not quite. It was more that saying it out loud would make it mean something, and she wasn't ready to decide what it meant. A man had caught her when she fell. A man had given her his number. These were simple, factual things that didn't need to become complicated. She unloaded equipment in the kitchen at midnight and tried not to think about the card in her apron pocket. She got home at 12:45 to a dark apartment and Marco asleep in the bedroom. She stood in the kitchen for a moment. The same kitchen, the same cracked tile, the same flat, indifferent space that their life together had settled into. And she felt the distance between the woman who had left this apartment this morning and the woman who was standing in it now, and she couldn't entirely account for it. She got ready for bed quietly, the way she always did, and lay in the dark next to a man who had something to tell her, and she listened to him breathe, and she thought, not about the card, she told herself, but she was lying, she thought about the card. And eventually, somewhere close to 2 a.m., she fell into the shallow, insufficient sleep that had become her normal. Marco sat her down on a Sunday. He had made coffee, which should have told her something. Marco making coffee for her was an event, not a habit. He sat across from her at the kitchen table with the careful posture of a man who had rehearsed this, and she sat very still and kept her hands flat on the table and looked at him and waited. He talked for 7 minutes. She would realize later that she had been counting without knowing it. 7 minutes. He used words like growing as individuals and not losing each other and exploring what we both need. And Emma sat there with her hands flat on the table and her coffee untouched and listened to her husband propose, in careful and considered language, an open marriage. She didn't say anything for a long time after he stopped. How long have you been thinking about this? She finally asked. A while. How long is a while? Emma. Marco. How long? He shifted slightly. A few months. She looked at her coffee. She picked it up and set it back down without drinking it. Is there someone specific, she said, or is this general? It's not. This isn't about someone else. It's about us. About us having room to. Is there someone specific? He didn't answer fast enough. She nodded once, slowly, the way you nod when something you suspected but refused to know becomes suddenly confirmed. I need some air, she said. Emma, let's talk about this. She was already standing. I'm going to Sophie's. I need. She stopped, breathed. I'll call you later. She walked out of the apartment with her coat and her keys and the card that she had moved from her apron to the inside pocket of her bag, and she stood in the elevator going down and pressed her back against the wall and did not cry. She had cried enough over smaller things. She had cried over a silence at dinner, over an unreturned phone call, over the particular way he had stopped reaching for her hand in the street. She was not going to cry over this. She got to the lobby. Cold air hit her face when the door opened. She stood on the sidewalk in the November air with the city moving around her at its relentless, indifferent pace. And she reached into her bag and closed her fingers around the card, and she stood there for a full 30 seconds just holding it, not deciding anything yet, just holding it. Her phone rang. Sophie. She answered it. "How'd it go?" Sophie said. "The gala remnants are all accounted for, by the way, so if you're calling to confess about the tray, Marco wants an open marriage." Silence. "Emma. I'm outside. I'm fine." "Fine. I'm going to walk for a while. Come here. Come over right now." "In a little while. I just need—" She exhaled. The city smelled like cold pavement and exhaust and the ghost of someone's takeout from a nearby doorway. "I need a minute." She hung up. She put the card back in her bag. She started walking. Above her, Manhattan did what Manhattan always did. Continued, indifferent and blazing, without adjusting itself for anyone's broken heart. Emma Rossi walked north with her hands in her pockets and her shoulders against the cold and the quiet, terrible knowledge settling into her bones that the man she had married had been keeping a secret, and that secret was not open marriage. She just didn't know yet how deep it went. And somewhere across the city, in a penthouse above a skyline that had never once asked permission, Dante Valente was sitting at a desk with a glass of water and a contract he hadn't yet signed, thinking about a woman with ink-stained knuckles and the straightest spine he had seen in years, and wondering if she would call. She didn't know that yet either. She called him on a Tuesday, not because she had decided anything, not because the week between the Sunday conversation and that Tuesday morning had resolved itself into anything clean or manageable. She called him because it was 7:43 a.m., and she was sitting on Sophie's couch. She had been sleeping on Sophie's couch for 5 days, and she had a cup of coffee that was actually hot for once, and she looked at the card, and she thought, why not? Which was not a great reason to do anything, but was at least an honest one. It rang twice. "Emma Rossi," he said. Not a question. She almost hung up. "How did you know it was me?" "I only gave that number to one person." She didn't say anything for a moment. Outside Sophie's window, the city was already moving, already loud, already performing its daily indifference to individual human problems. "You said breakfast," she said. "I did. I'm available Thursday. Thursday works." A pause, not an uncomfortable one. "There's a place on West 11th, Marta's, 8 o'clock. "Okay." "Okay," he said, and that was it. No maneuvering. No, "I'm so glad you called," or "I was hoping to hear from you." Just okay. She sat there after she hung up and stared at her coffee and tried to figure out why straightforward felt so foreign. Sophie appeared from the hallway in a bathrobe, reading Emma's face the way she always did. "Who was that?" "A client," Emma said, which was not technically a lie yet. Sophie squinted. "You're a terrible liar." "I know." "You want to tell me?" Emma drank her coffee. "Not yet." Sophie sat down next to her and didn't push it, which was one of the things Emma loved most about her sister. The ability to know when silence was the more useful thing. They sat together for a while, and the city made noise outside, and neither of them said anything about Marco, though he occupied the room the way absent people do when too much is left unspoken. Emma had not gone back to the apartment. She had sent Marco a text that said staying at Sophie's for now, and he had replied, "Okay, let me know when you want to talk," and that had been the entirety of their communication for 5 days. She was not crying anymore. The crying had happened in the first 36 hours. Ugly, exhausted crying, the kind with no dignity in it, in Sophie's bathroom with the fan running so she didn't have to hear herself. After that, the feeling had settled into something harder and quieter and more dangerous, the way water settles into ice. She opened her laptop and went back to the Hargrove project. The work was always there. The work had never let her down the way people had. Marta's was the kind of place that didn't advertise itself. No sign, just an address, dark wood, and low light even at 8 in the morning, and coffee that smelled serious. Dante was already there when she arrived, sitting in the back corner with a cup in front of him and no phone in his hand, which she noticed because every man she knew ate breakfast with a phone in his hand. He stood when he saw her. Not performatively, just stood, the way someone does when they were raised to. She sat down across from him, and a waiter appeared immediately, and she ordered coffee and eggs, and looked at Dante Valente in the daylight, away from marble floors and ballroom lighting, and tried to get an accurate read. He was harder to read than most. That was the first real thing she understood about him. Not because he was hiding anything. She would come to understand later that hiding wasn't really in his vocabulary, but because he existed at a frequency most people weren't tuned to catch. "How's the ankle?" he asked. "I didn't hurt my ankle." "You were favoring your left side when you walked in." She blinked. "These shoes are new." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. "How are you, Emma?" Not "how are you doing?" or "how has your week been?" The particular social softeners that people use when they don't actually want a real answer. Just "how are you?" Direct and undecorated, with the specific quality of someone who intended to listen to whatever she said. She looked at her coffee cup. "I've had better weeks." "Do you want to talk about it?" "No." A beat. "Maybe. I don't know." She looked up. "I don't usually talk about personal things with people I've just met." "That's fair." "Is it weird that I'm here?" He considered that. Actually considered it, didn't just reach for reassurance. "It's unusual," he said, "but unusual isn't the same as weird." She laughed, a short, involuntary thing that surprised her. He watched it happen with that same quiet attentiveness, like he was noting something. "Tell me what you do," he said. "Not the catering." "The ink on your hands at the gala. That wasn't catering." She looked at her knuckles. The ink was there again. It was always there. "Graphic design, illustration mostly. I do branding work for small businesses, some editorial. I freelance." "Do you like it?" "I love it." The answer came before she could make it polite and qualified. "I mean, yes. It's the thing I'm good at. The thing that makes sense when nothing else does." "What kind of illustration?" She hesitated. No one asked follow-up questions about the work. Marco had stopped asking years ago. Clients asked about deliverables and timelines and file formats. Sophie asked if she was remembering to charge enough. "Characters, mostly. I used to want to do—" "It doesn't matter." "What did you used to want to do?" She looked at him. "You're going to keep asking until I answer." "Probably." "I wanted to create a graphic novel, a long one, the kind with a full world in it." She said it the way you say something you've locked in a drawer, carefully, like it might not survive the air. "I had the whole thing mapped out. I had characters with whole histories. I started it when I was 22, and then life did what life does, and it's been sitting in a folder on my computer for 4 years. Dante was quiet for a moment. "What folder name?" he said. She frowned. "What? What do you name the folder?" "That's a strange question." "People name the things they're afraid to lose something specific. What's the folder name?" She stared at him. "Someday," she said, and hated how small it sounded. He nodded once, like she'd confirmed something. "How long has it been someday?" She picked up her coffee and didn't answer. They talked for 2 hours. She didn't realize it until she checked her phone and saw the time and felt the specific shock of time passing without her tracking it, which had not happened in months. He told her about his company in the broad strokes that weren't evasive but weren't exhaustive either. Real estate development, international holdings, a consulting arm he'd built from scratch at 24. She got the impression she was getting the honest version of everything, and also that the honest version had depth she wasn't being taken to yet. He didn't flirt. That was the other thing she kept waiting for, and it didn't come. He was attentive in a way that felt nothing like performance. When they were leaving, coats on, cold air coming through as someone opened the front door, he stopped on the sidewalk and looked at her. "I have a project," he said. "My company is rebranding a hospitality division. New hotels, new identity from the ground up. I need a designer who thinks in worlds, not templates." He paused. "I thought about it during breakfast." Emma looked at him. "You want to offer me work?" "Yes." "You just met me." "I saw your face when you talked about your graphic novel," he said. "That's enough for me." She stood on West 11th Street with the November air on her face and thought about the folder called Someday, and the empty apartment in Chelsea and Marco's careful 7-minute speech, and the 4 years that had slipped through her hands. "Send me the brief," she said. She went back to the Chelsea apartment the following Saturday to get her drafting tablet and her external drive, the two things without which she couldn't actually work. She had timed it for the afternoon when Marco coached his friend's kid's soccer thing on weekends. She had a key. She would be in and out in 15 minutes. He was home. She heard him before she saw him. Not his voice, but the sound of movement in the kitchen, the specific noise of someone who wasn't expecting anyone. She stood in the entryway with her key still in her hand and her bag on her shoulder and debated walking back out. She stayed. Marco appeared in the kitchen doorway and stopped. Emma. He looked. Surprised wasn't the word. Caught, maybe. Not at anything specific yet. Just caught in the general crime of being in his life that she still technically shared. I didn't know you were coming. I need my drafting tablet. I'll be quick. You don't have to be quick. This is still your place. She moved past him toward the studio space she'd claimed in the second bedroom. It was the room that had never become a nursery, a fact that lived in her chest without finding words. Her drafting table was where she'd left it. She unplugged the tablet, opened the desk drawer for her drive. Marco appeared in the doorway. Can we talk? I'm kind of in the middle of... Emma, please. She turned around. He looked tired. She noticed that objectively the way you notice things about a painting you've seen so many times you've stopped feeling them. Tired and something else. Not guilty, not exactly. More like someone trying to decide how much of a thing to reveal and constantly settling on too little. I've been thinking, he said. I would hope so. That was unfair. What I said. The way I said it. Which part? He rubbed his hand over his face. Emma, can you not... Which part was unfair, Marco? The part where you asked for an open marriage? The part where you did it on a Sunday morning like you were suggesting brunch? Or the part where I had to ask you 3 times whether there was someone specific and you couldn't answer fast enough? The silence that followed had weight. It's not... He started. Don't. She held up her hand. Don't finish that sentence if what comes after it is, it's not what you think. Don't do that to me. He looked at the floor. And she watched him look at the floor, and she understood in that moment, not everything, not yet, but the shape of it, that whatever she had suspected about the last several months, she had been right. She just hadn't let herself know it. How long? She said. Her voice came out flat and even, and not quite like her voice. Emma? How long, Marco? He didn't answer, and his not answering was the answer. And Emma Rossi picked up her drafting tablet and her external drive and walked out of the room. He followed her to the front door. We need to actually talk about this. We can't just... She turned. She was a smaller person than him physically, and she had spent years making herself smaller in every other way too. And in that moment, standing in her own doorway, she stopped. I waited for you, she said. I waited through the dinners where you barely spoke. I waited through the nights you stopped coming home on time. I waited through you looking at me like I was a piece of furniture that had been there so long you stopped noticing it. I did everything I could think of to be what you needed, and I kept waiting for you to come back, because I thought if I was patient enough, the person I married would come back. She pulled her keys from her bag. He didn't, and you should have told me why a long time ago. She opened the door. Emma, where are you staying? Are you at Sophie's? Goodbye, Marco. She walked to the elevator and pressed the button and stood with her back straight and her jaw set, and she did not turn around even when she heard him say her name one more time from the hallway. The elevator came. She got in. The doors closed. She breathed. The brief from Dante's office arrived Monday morning, 40 pages, thorough and precise, with a level of detail that told her whoever had compiled it understood how design actually worked. She sat at Sophie's kitchen table with her coffee and read the whole thing before she did anything else. The hospitality division was called Vela. 4 properties, 2 in New York, 1 in Chicago, 1 in development in Miami. The vision was specific: tactile luxury, human scale, spaces that felt inhabited rather than designed to impress. The brief used the word emotional architecture 3 times. Emma read that phrase the 3rd time and sat back and stared at the ceiling. She emailed back, I'm interested. When can we meet to discuss direction? His reply came in 4 minutes. Tomorrow. My office. 10 a.m. I'll have someone send you the address. She built her first concept deck in 2 days. She hadn't worked like that in years. She hadn't had a reason to. She sat at Sophie's table with her headphones in and her tablet going, and she built a visual world for Vela that pulled from everything she'd been saving in the back of her head, every texture and color theory and narrative arc she'd ever put in a folder labeled Someday. And at 2 in the morning, she sat back and looked at what she'd made and felt something she had almost forgotten the name of: pride. Just simple, clean pride. The meeting in Dante's office was on the 30th floor of a building on 6th Avenue, a space that was impressive without announcing it. The furniture chosen by someone who understood that restraint was its own statement. He had 3 people with him: a woman named Claire who ran the hospitality division and had the energy of someone who ate inefficiency for breakfast, and 2 others whose names Emma caught and filed away. Dante sat at the head of the table and let the meeting belong to the work. Emma presented for 40 minutes. She hadn't presented anything this substantial in 2 years. Her voice was steady. Her hands were not, slightly, in the beginning, but she kept them moving, kept them on the deck, kept them in the work. When she finished, Claire looked at Dante. Dante looked at the last slide Emma had left up. A full-page color study for the flagship New York property, warm terracotta and deep navy, something that felt like being held. "How fast can you move?" Claire asked. "Faster than you need me to," Emma said. Claire smiled. It was the smile of someone not used to being answered that directly. Dante hadn't said anything yet. He was still looking at the slide. "The color story in the 3rd section," he said. "Walk me through it." She did. 4 minutes, detailed, no hedging. He asked 2 more questions, both precise, both architectural, both revealing that he had actually read the 40-page brief she'd been given and processed it at a level most clients didn't bother with. She answered both. He nodded. "You're hired." "Just like that?" "Just like that." Claire started talking about contracts and timelines, and Emma let it wash over her for a moment because she needed a moment to absorb the fact that something was happening, something that felt, against all reasonable expectation, like forward motion. It was 3 weeks into the project when she saw them. She had been in the financial district for a client pickup, something small and separate from the Vela work, and she was cutting through the block near Fulton Street when she saw Marco. She saw Marco the way you see things you're not prepared for. Suddenly, without buffer, the image landing before the mind has time to build a wall against it. He was on the sidewalk, maybe 30 feet ahead of her, in his coat, and he was not alone. The woman beside him was blonde and laughing at something, and Marco had his hand. Marco had his hand in hers, not beside her, not walking near her. He was holding her hand with the easy, habitual grip of someone who had been holding it for a long time. Emma stopped walking. The city moved around her. Someone bumped her shoulder from behind and said nothing about it, and kept moving. A cab horn went off. The sky above the buildings was the flat white of an overcast November afternoon. Marco laughed at something the woman said. She hadn't seen him laugh like that in over a year. Emma stood on the sidewalk for 7 seconds. She counted them without meaning to. 7 seconds of watching her husband hold another woman's hand in the casual, comfortable way of people who have decided they belong to each other. Then she turned and walked the other way. She made it half a block before she stopped, stepped into the narrow space between a deli and a delivery doorway, put her back against the brick wall, and closed her eyes. Her hands were shaking, not from heartbreak. She would examine that later and find that the heartbreak had already happened, had been happening slowly for months, and was mostly done. What was shaking her now was something harder and more animal than sadness. It was the confirmation. The solid, witnessed, undeniable confirmation that his careful 7-minute speech on a Sunday morning had not been an impulse or a crisis of identity or even a midlife recalibration. He had already decided, he had already chosen, and he had looked her in the face and used words like growing and exploring because the truth, "I am in love with someone else, and have been for some time," was too direct for him to say. She had been patient. She had been kind. She had made herself small and useful, and she had waited. And while she was waiting, her husband was on Fulton Street holding someone else's hand. She pulled out her phone. She didn't call Sophie. She stared at her contacts for a long moment and then navigated to the number she'd transferred from the card, the one with no name attached, and she called it without thinking about it too hard because thinking about it too hard would have stopped her. It rang once. Emma. His voice was even and present, the same as always. She couldn't say anything for a second. She breathed. Dante? Her voice came out rough at the edges. I need... She stopped, breathed again. I'm sorry. I don't know why I called you. A pause, short. Where are you? Fulton Street. I just... She laughed, and it didn't sound like a laugh. I just saw something I didn't want to see. Are you safe? Yes. I'm physically fine. I'm just... She pressed her free hand flat against the brick. I'm just standing in an alley between a deli and a loading dock having a breakdown, apparently. Stay there, he said. Dante, you don't have to... Emma, stay there. I'll be 20 minutes. She started to say that was ridiculous, that she was fine, that she didn't need someone to come find her in an alley on Fulton Street. She said none of those things. Okay, she said. He was there in 18 minutes. He came around the corner in his coat with his hands in his pockets, and he looked at her standing against the brick wall, and he didn't say, "Are you okay?" or "What happened?" or anything that would have required her to perform being more put together than she was. He just came and stood near her and looked at her, and she looked back, and after a moment she said, "He had her hand." Dante said nothing. "He was holding her hand," she said, "right there, on the street, like it was the most normal thing in the world. And the thing is..." Her voice broke slightly, and she breathed through it. "The thing is, it probably is the most normal thing in the world to him. He's probably been doing it for months, while I was in our apartment, in his apartment, waiting. She shook her head. I'm not crying about this. You don't have to. I'm angry, she said. She stopped, breathed. I'm so tired of feeling like I was the only person in that marriage who was actually there. Dante was quiet for a moment, then, come with me. Where? Somewhere that isn't an alley. She almost laughed again, and this time it was closer to the real thing. They walked 3 blocks to a small place he knew, a coffee shop that had no right to be as warm as it was, and they sat across from each other, and Dante put his hands flat on the table and said, quietly and without preamble, "He cheated on you. This has been going on for longer than he admitted, and what he did in that conversation, the open marriage conversation, was give himself a retroactive exit that didn't cost him anything." Emma stared at him. "You deserve to know that clearly," he said, "not because it makes it hurt less, but because you were not the problem. You were not insufficient. You were not invisible. Someone was careless with something valuable, and that is entirely on him." She sat with that for a long time. Then she said, "I want a divorce." "I know. I want it clean. I don't want to fight over every piece of furniture in that apartment. I want out." "My legal team is good," he said, "if you want their help." She looked at him across the table. "Why are you doing this?" He didn't look away. "Because you called me, and because you deserve someone in your corner." Emma Rosie sat in a warm coffee shop on a cold November afternoon and felt something shift in her chest. Not the soft, romantic shift of old movies, but something more like the particular moment when a bone that has been set wrong is finally set right. It hurt. It was also, unmistakably, a beginning. She nodded once. "Set up the meeting," she said. And somewhere across the city, in an apartment on the 14th floor of a Chelsea building, Marco Rossi was walking through the front door with his key and his coat and his uncomplicated conscience, entirely unaware that his wife had just stopped waiting, and that the man sitting across from her had resources, patience, and a very particular the legal team's name was Harmon and Voss, and their offices occupied the 28th floor of a building on Lexington that communicated without saying a word that losing was not something they did. Emma sat in a conference room with glass walls and a view of Midtown that would have been beautiful if she'd had any capacity left for beauty, and across from her was a woman named Diane Voss, 50-something, silver hair cut to the jaw, a woman who clearly had not become a senior partner in matrimonial law by being gentle about things. Dante was not in the room. He had brought her here, introduced her, and excused himself to take a call, and Emma had understood instinctively that this was deliberate, that he was giving her space to be the person making decisions, not the person being handled. She was still thinking about that when Diane Voss opened a folder and looked at her with the steady, evaluating gaze of someone who needed facts before she needed feelings. "Tell me everything," Diane said. "Start where it actually started, not where it felt like it started. Those are usually different places." So Emma talked. She talked for 40 minutes. Diane took notes by hand, actual handwriting, not a tablet, a fountain pen moving across yellow legal paper in a hand that never paused or hesitated. Emma talked about the silences first, because the silences were where it had started, the way water damage starts behind the wall before it's ever visible on the surface. She talked about the dinners and the unreturned calls and the way he had stopped reaching for her hand and started sleeping at the very edge of the bed. Then she talked about the Sunday, the 7 minutes, the words like growing and exploring that she now recognized for exactly what they were, linguistic packaging designed to make his convenience look like her liberation. Then she talked about Fulton Street, the hand. Diane looked up from her notes. "How long ago was Fulton Street?" 4 days. "Did he know you saw him?" "No." "Good." Diane set the pen down. "Mrs. Rossi?" "Emma." "Emma, I need you to understand something before we go further. New York is an equitable distribution state, which means the court divides marital assets based on fairness, not fault. The affair, if it can be documented, doesn't automatically change what you're entitled to. What it does is give us leverage in negotiation, and leverage is its own currency." She folded her hands on the table. "Do you want this fast, or do you want this thorough?" Emma looked at her. "Can I have both?" Diane almost smiled. "Tell me about the apartment." They talked for another hour. By the end of it, Emma had signed a retainer agreement, and Diane Voss had a comprehensive picture of 3 years of marriage reduced to its legal skeleton. And Emma walked out of that conference room feeling hollowed out in a way that was somehow also clarifying, like a space that had been cleared for something new. Dante was waiting in the lobby, standing near the floor-to-ceiling windows with his phone in his hand. He looked up when she came through the door. "How was Diane?" he said. "Efficient, terrifying, effective, I imagine." "All three." He put the phone away. "Are you okay?" She thought about the honest answer. "I will be," she said. "That's probably the most accurate thing I can say right now." He nodded like that was enough, and she appreciated that he didn't try to improve it. She moved into a sublet in Brooklyn that a friend of Sophie's friend had available. A 4th-floor walk-up in Carroll Gardens with drafty windows and a radiator that made sounds like it was working through a personal crisis. But the light in the main room was good, and the kitchen table was the right height, and she could see a strip of the harbor from the bedroom window if she stood at the right angle. She paid first month and last month out of the advance Dante's company had deposited for the Vela project, and she stood in the empty apartment with her 2 bags and her drafting tablet and the particular feeling of a person who has walked away from everything familiar and hasn't yet landed anywhere solid. It was not comfortable. It was also entirely hers. She worked. That was what she had always done when the rest of life became unmanageable, and she did it now with a focus that bordered on obsessive, up before 6, at the table with coffee while the light was still gray, building out the Vela identity piece by piece. The work was the best she had ever done. She knew it in the way you know things you don't want to say out loud because saying them might call some counterforce into being. She kept her mouth shut and kept working. Dante checked in every few days. Not hovering, checking. There was a difference she was learning to identify. He would send a message. "Vela update. Claire needs the secondary palette by Thursday. Anything you need from us?" Or he would call about the project and then, only after the work conversation was done, say, "How are you eating?" She told him to stop asking that. He asked it again the following week. She stopped telling him to stop. 3 weeks into the sublet, Sophie came over and stood in the middle of the living space and looked at the sketches and color studies and concept boards that had taken over every available surface, and she said, "Emma, I know. This is extraordinary. I know. I don't say that because you're my sister. I know that too." Emma handed her a coffee. "Sit down. Stop standing there looking moved." Sophie sat. She wrapped both hands around the cup and looked at Emma with the particular expression that meant she was about to say something she had been holding for a while. "Tell me about him," Sophie said. Emma sat down across from her. I told you, he offered me the project. That's not what I'm asking. Sophie, I'm not asking because I want to be dramatic about it. I'm asking because I have seen your face every week for 3 years, and I watched you disappear inside that marriage 1 inch at a time, and I did not know how to stop it. And now, she gestured at the room, at the work, at Emma's face. You look like yourself, so I'm asking. Emma looked at her coffee. He listens, she said finally. He asks questions and then he actually waits for the answer. He doesn't... She stopped, started again. He doesn't make me feel like I'm taking up too much space. Sophie was quiet. It's not like that. It's complicated. The situation is... Emma, I'm not your mother. I'm not going to lecture you. Sophie picked up her cup. I just wanted to know, because whoever he is, he seems to be reminding you that you exist. Emma said nothing. She existed. She was starting to believe that again. Diane Voss called on a Thursday morning, 7 weeks after the retainer was signed, and her voice had the particular quality of someone who has found something and is deciding how to hold it. Emma, I need you to come in today. What's happened? Today, Emma, 2 o'clock. Bring nothing, I have everything. Emma arrived at 2 o'clock with her coat and her phone and the knot in her sternum that had been her constant companion for months, and that she had learned to function around the way you function around a stone in your shoe when there's nowhere to sit. Diane was already at the conference table. She had her yellow legal pad and a separate folder, manila, letter-sized, thick with documents. She had also, Emma noticed, a second cup of coffee already prepared on Emma's side of the table. That was when Emma knew it was bad. Diane sat down and opened the folder without preamble. When your husband came to me, through intermediaries, last week, to discuss voluntary settlement terms, she began, and Emma felt the knot tighten. I wasn't surprised. That's standard. What I was surprised by was what his attorney included in the preliminary disclosure package. She slid a document across the table. Do you recognize this? Emma looked at it. It was a bank statement, a joint account. Their joint account, the one they'd opened in the first year of marriage for shared expenses. She looked at the dates, the amounts, the withdrawals. She looked at Diane. Over the course of the last 14 months, Diane said, steady and clinical, approximately $230,000 was moved from your joint account through a series of transfers to a secondary account your husband opened approximately 18 months ago. Emma stared at the paper. The timing, Diane continued, suggests the account was opened roughly 3 months before he proposed the open marriage arrangement. Our forensic accountant's preliminary assessment is that he had been planning a financial exit prior to $230,000, Emma said. Yes. We didn't have... She stopped. Where did it even come from? We didn't have that kind of... You did. Your husband's company received a significant equity payout 16 months ago, a deal closure he didn't disclose to you. The payout deposited into the joint account and was then systematically redistributed over the following 14 months. Diane was watching her carefully. Emma, he didn't just plan to leave you. He spent over a year ensuring you would have nothing when he did. The room was very quiet. Emma's hands were flat on the table. She could feel the grain of the wood against her palms. She was focusing on the grain of the wood because if she focused on that, she did not have to focus on the thing that was happening in her chest, which was not heartbreak. Heartbreak she had already processed, already burned through, but something uglier and more corrosive. The specific species of betrayal that comes from realizing the person you trusted most was running a parallel life in which you were already a casualty. His attorney, Emma said. Her voice came out even. That surprised her. They brought this to you voluntarily. They disclosed it as part of the asset inventory they're legally required to provide. I don't believe they expected me to find the timeline. A pause. I found the timeline. So he intended for me to agree to a settlement, Emma said slowly, without knowing the money existed, without knowing there was anything to negotiate for. That is my assessment, yes. Emma sat back in her chair. She thought about the 7-minute speech. She thought about the words like growing and exploring. She thought about the Sunday morning, the kitchen table, the cold coffee, and herself sitting with her hands flat on the table, being reasonable, being patient, being the person who took up the least possible space. She thought about Marco holding that woman's hand on Fulton Street with the ease of a man without a guilty conscience, because maybe his conscience had reclassified her from wife to complication so long ago that the guilt had simply dissolved. "Okay," Emma said. Diane looked at her. "Okay? What do we do?" Diane picked up her pen. "We go to war." Emma called Dante from the sidewalk outside the building. The cold hit her when she pushed through the door, and she barely felt it. The city was doing its usual afternoon performance, the buses and cabs and pedestrians moving with the collective indifferent momentum of 10,000 individual purposes. And she stood in the middle of it and called him, and he answered on the second ring. "Emma." "Did you know?" she said. No preamble, no softening, a pause. One beat. "Know what?" "About the money, the account, the—" She stopped herself, breathed. "I need to ask you directly, and I need you to answer me directly. Did you have any information about my husband's finances that you didn't tell me?" "No." Flat, immediate. No defensive inflation, just the word. "I knew he had done something I didn't have the specifics of, which is why I gave you Diane's number. What did she find?" Emma told him. He was quiet for a moment that was long enough to mean he was actually thinking and not just manufacturing a response. "Come to the office," he said. "I don't need you to fix this, Dante." "I know you don't. Come anyway." She went. His office at that hour was mostly empty, the outer rooms populated only by a woman at the front desk and the low hum of a building operating in its reduced evening mode. He met her in the corridor outside his office and let her in and closed the door and didn't go behind the desk. Sat instead in one of the chairs arranged at the side of the room and gestured at the one across from it, and Emma sat down and the story came out again, all of it, but harder this time because the second telling had lost the numbness of shock and was left with only the cold exposed nerve of what it actually meant. He listened the way he always listened, without interrupting, without performing sympathy. Just present and still, and in it with her. When she finished, he said, "How much did you know about his company's finances?" "Almost nothing. He kept it separate. I thought that was a boundary he needed, and I respected it." "He used that against you." "Yes." He was quiet a moment. "Diane is good enough to recover the assets. New York law is clear on marital property. The timeline is documented. He will not win this." "I know." She looked at her hands. "It's not even about the money. I don't want his money. I want—" She stopped. "I want to not have been that stupid. I want to not have sat in that kitchen for 3 years while he built an exit strategy, and I thought we were having communication problems." "You weren't stupid," he said. "You trusted the person you were supposed to trust. That's not a character flaw. That's what marriage asks of you." She looked at him. "Don't be kind to me right now. I can't absorb kindness right now. I'll fall apart." "Then be angry," he said simply. "That's fine too." She was. She sat in that chair in Dante Valente's office and let the anger be present without trying to manage it into something more appropriate, and she felt it move through her like a current, hot and real and alive. And when it settled, she felt something shift into place underneath it, something load-bearing that had not been there before. "I'm going to need somewhere to stay," she said. "Diane wants me to establish a clear residential address separate from Marco for the divorce filing. The Carroll Gardens sublet is month to month, and the landlord is already talking about selling the building." Dante didn't hesitate. "The penthouse has a guest suite, full floor, private entrance." She looked at him. "It's not a favor," he said. It's a practical arrangement. You have a project to deliver, you need stability to work, and I have the space. Those are the facts." "Those are not all the facts," she said. He held her gaze. "No," he said, "they're not all the facts, but they're the ones that matter for this decision." Emma sat for a long moment. The city made it sound somewhere far below. "I'll need a separate key," she said. Obviously. And I'm paying rent. We'll negotiate. Dante. Emma. The edge of his mouth moved. Negotiate means we'll discuss it. It doesn't mean I'll lose. She stood up, looked at him sitting in the chair with his jacket on and his hands easy on the armrests, a man who occupied space without apology, who asked questions and waited for answers, who had shown up in 18 minutes to an alley on Fulton Street without making her feel small for needing him to. She thought about the folder called Someday on her laptop. She thought about 4 years. She thought about Marco's 7 minutes and Diane Voss's manila folder and $230,000 that had been the architecture of her husband's plan to leave her with nothing. She thought about what it felt like to believe you deserved more than that. She was still learning it. But she was learning. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. The confrontation happened 11 days later. Dante had arranged it. Diane had structured it. Emma had not planned to be there. That had been the original arrangement, that his team would go in with the documented financial evidence and present Marco with the settlement terms, and he would have 48 hours to agree or to begin a process that, as Diane had explained with quiet precision, would expose the secondary account in a public filing that his company's investors would find extremely interesting. Emma changed her mind at 8 a.m. on the morning of the meeting. She called Dante. I want to be there. A brief pause. Emma, it's my marriage. It's my money. I want to look him in the face when he finds out that his exit strategy failed. She held the phone steady. I've spent 3 years in that apartment making myself small so he could be comfortable. I want to be in the room. Silence for a moment. I'll send the car at 9, he said. The apartment looked exactly the same. She had expected that to surprise her, and it didn't. The cracked tile was still there near the stove. The ring from the wine glass was still on the kitchen table. 3 years of her life still sitting where she'd left it, unmourned, untouched, patiently waiting for someone to notice it was gone. Marco was in the living room when they arrived. Dante, Emma, and Diane Voss, who had the energy of a person who enjoyed Tuesdays that looked like this. Marco looked at Emma first, with surprise, then at Dante, and his expression went through 3 phases in fast succession. Confusion, the specific micro-expression of a man calculating a situation, and then the carefully arranged neutrality of someone who had decided to appear in control. He looked at Dante longer than was comfortable. Who is this, he said. Someone who knows what a forensic accountant is, Emma said. Diane set the folder on the coffee table. Marco looked at it. He had good instincts. She'd always given him that. She watched them work in real time behind his eyes, the assessment, the rapid recalculation. He picked up the top document and read approximately 1 page before he set it back down. Then he looked at Emma. How long have you been investigating me? He said. Quiet. Not quite angry yet. Still in the part where he thought he might be able to manage it. Diane found it in your own disclosure package, Emma said. Your attorney handed it over. You want to be angry at someone for this. Start there. He stood up. Emma, let's talk about this privately. No. You have no idea what the context is for Marco. Her voice was even, level. It surprised her, and she could see it surprised him too. 18 months ago, you opened an account. 16 months ago, your company closed an equity deal, and the payout went into our joint account. Over the next 14 months, you moved $230,000 out of that account in increments small enough not to flag. 7 weeks ago, you gave me a speech about open marriage. She paused. I know what the context is. The color shifted in his face. You were going to let me sign a settlement, she said. You had Melissa. The name came out before she made a decision about it. She had found the name in the course of the last month, had been holding it without using it, and now it was just in the room. You had Melissa, and you had your account, and you had your exit, and you were going to hand me a settlement that looked fair and watch me sign it and walk away knowing there was nothing in my bank account that I didn't already know about. That was the plan. Marco said nothing. Tell me I'm wrong, she said. Tell me one specific thing I got wrong. The apartment was very quiet. Outside on the street, a truck went by, and the window frames rattled faintly, the way they always had. The building's answer to anything too heavy passing. Marco looked at her. Not with guilt, and not with defiance, but with something Emma had not expected. A kind of exhausted recognition, The look of a man who has been found out and has decided that the performance of innocence is more work than it's worth. "The settlement is fair," he said. "It was designed to be fair to you," Diane said from behind Emma, and her voice was the most pleasant voice in the room, which made it the most frightening. "We have a counter-proposal." She slid the second document across the coffee table. Marco picked it up. He read it. He set it down. He looked at Dante for the first time since the opening. Really looked. The kind of look that was trying to establish what it was dealing with. Dante stood near the far wall with his hands easy at his sides and returned the look without expression or accommodation. "Who are you to her?" Marco said. "Someone in her corner," Dante said. "Sign the document, Marco." "That's not your name to use. Sign the document." The silence that followed was the loudest thing in the apartment, louder than the street and the radiator and the memories of every dinner party and quiet morning and missed phone call and unreturned touch. Marco stood in the middle of the life they had built and looked at his wife, who was standing with her shoulders back and her jaw level and her hands not shaking, and whatever he saw there told him something that the forensic account and Diane Voss's counter-proposal had not been able to tell him on their own. She was not waiting anymore. He signed the document. They were on the sidewalk afterward, the three of them, and Diane said something practical about the next steps and timeline that Emma processed at half speed because the other half of her was still standing in that living room looking at Marco's face the moment he understood that the exit he had architected so carefully had already been sealed. Diane left in a cab. Emma stood on the sidewalk in front of the building she had lived in for 3 years, and she breathed the cold air, and she did not feel triumphant. She felt the way you feel after something large ends. Not relief, exactly, but the strange lightness of a weight that you had carried so long you'd stopped noticing it until it was gone. Dante was beside her. He hadn't said anything since the apartment. He was good at that, at being present without filling the space with words the moment wasn't asking for. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me." "Dante, you did that, not me." She looked up at him. The sky above the Chelsea building was the low gray of late November, the kind of sky that wasn't pretending to be anything other than what it was. She thought about the night she had walked out of this building the first time, after the Sunday speech, and stood on the sidewalk with the city around her and Marco's number still in her phone and a card in her bag, and no idea yet that she was already at the edge of something she couldn't see. "I need to get the rest of my things," she said. "Not today," he said. She looked at him. "Not today," she agreed. They walked. No destination, just the movement of people who needed to be moving. Two people in a city that never needed a reason for anyone to be walking, and Emma Rossi walked beside Dante Valente through the November streets and felt, slowly and without announcement, like someone who was learning to take up the right amount of space. She did not know what was coming. She did not know that the life she was walking into was already visible from a distance. Visible to people who made it their business to know what the people around Dante Valente valued, and who valued that information for reasons that had nothing to do with love. She did not know that her name had already appeared in a conversation she would never be shown. She did not know that the safety she was building, room by room and day by day, had a perimeter that was being studied by people who knew exactly where it was thinnest. She did not know any of that yet. She was learning to believe she deserved a future. And somewhere across the city, in a room with no windows and a table with 4 men around it, one of those men was saying her name for the first time. She had been living in the penthouse for 6 weeks when she stopped flinching at the view. That was how she measured her own recovery in those days. Not by milestones or breakthroughs, but by the small cessations of fear. The first week she'd kept the curtains drawn on the floor-to-ceiling windows because 41 floors of open Manhattan sky felt like too much honesty. By the 3rd week, she was leaving them open during the day. By week 6, she was taking her morning coffee to the window and standing there in the early light and looking at the city the way you look at something you are beginning to trust. The guest suite was large enough to contain her life without feeling borrowed. She had her drafting table set up in the corner where the north light came in flat and reliable. Her books were stacked on the windowsill in the order she used them. The folder called Someday was open on her desktop for the first time in 4 years, and she had been adding to it, not the graphic novel, Not yet, but sketches. Fragments. The slow archaeology of something she had buried and was beginning to unearth. She and Dante moved around each other in the penthouse with the careful courtesy of two people who understood that proximity was not the same as intrusion. He was usually up before her, already in his office or on a call when she came out in the morning. They ate dinner together 3 or 4 nights a week. Not planned, just the organic result of being in the same space at the end of the same long days. He cooked badly and admitted it without apology. She cooked adequately, and he said so with a precision that made her laugh the first time. The Vela project was in final delivery. Claire had stopped sending revision requests and started sending approval confirmations, and the hospitality team had used the phrase exactly right twice in the last week, which in corporate language was approximately the equivalent of a standing ovation. Emma was already fielding inquiries from 2 other firms. Word moved fast in Manhattan's design world, and the Vela identity was being talked about. She was, for the first time in years, visible in the right ways. She was also, without quite letting herself name it, falling in love. She didn't name it because naming it required examining it, and examining it meant acknowledging how much of herself was now organized around his presence. The way she listened for his footsteps in the morning, the particular quality of the silence when he was in the room versus when he wasn't. She had been made invisible by someone once, and she was terrified of the specific vulnerability of being seen again. So she held the feeling at arm's length and kept working and told herself that the timing was wrong and the situation was complicated and she would think about it later. Later was coming faster than she planned. It started with a black SUV. She noticed it first on a Wednesday, parked on the street below the building when she left for a meeting with a new client in Tribeca, still there when she came back 3 hours later. She might not have thought about it except that the same make and model, or one identical to it, was on the block near the Carroll Gardens building 2 days later when she went back to collect the last of her things from the sublet. She was not a paranoid person. She cataloged it and moved on. She told Dante over dinner on Friday, mostly because she had learned that withholding information from him was always a worse decision than not. He went very still. It was not the stillness of a man composing an answer. It was the stillness of a man who already had one and was deciding how much of it to give her. "What color?" he said. "Black. Both times." "Plates?" "I wasn't close enough." He set his fork down. He looked at her across the table with the expression she had come to identify as the one he wore when something required him to be more honest than was comfortable. "There's something I need to tell you," he said. "Okay." She held his gaze. "Tell me." His company, he explained, was not entirely the architecture of legitimate enterprise she had understood it to be. Not criminal, the word he chose deliberately, and she heard the precision in it, but operating in spaces where legitimate business and less legitimate power structures shared territory. Real estate at the scale he operated required relationships. Some of those relationships were with people who made their own rules. He had inherited some of those relationships when he'd taken control of the company at 26, after his father's death, and he had been, in the years since, methodically renegotiating terms and disentangling dependencies. He was further along than he'd been. He was not done. "There is a man named Reyes," he said. "Adrian Reyes. He runs an organization that had controlled, distribution rights through 3 commercial properties I own in the Bronx. I terminated that arrangement 8 months ago. He has been communicating his displeasure through intermediaries." Emma listened. "The SUV is almost certainly his people. They're watching me. They're watching you because watching you is the most efficient way to communicate to me that they can." He was steady, careful, giving her the information without the performance of control he'd clearly exercised to not have this conversation sooner. "I am sorry. I should have... When were you going to tell me?" "When I had a solution, not just a problem." She looked at him. "That's not how this works." "I know. If this involves me, if I am part of the situation, I need to know the situation, all of it." She did not raise her voice. She didn't need to. "I have spent 3 years with a man who decided what I needed to know. I will not do that again." He held her gaze. "You're right. No qualification, no defense, just the acknowledgement, clean and direct." "What's the solution?" she said. I have one meeting. I've been setting it up for 6 weeks. An agreement that removes me from any remaining obligation to Reyes's network and includes a non-interference clause going both directions. He paused. That meeting is in 4 days. And until then? Until then, you don't leave this building alone. She opened her mouth. Emma. His voice had something in it she hadn't heard before. Not authority, which he used sparingly, but something closer to bare fear, which she had not heard from him at all. Please. She closed her mouth. 4 days, she said. 4 days. The security team materialized the following morning. She had known abstractly that they existed. There were always 1 or 2 people in the lobby she'd learned to recognize. But by Saturday, there were 6 of them in visible positions around the building, and she understood for the first time in her body, rather than her head, what it meant to be inside someone's world rather than adjacent to it. A man named Carver was assigned specifically to her. Late 30s, former military from the way he moved, economical with words in a way that communicated competence rather than coldness. He was outside her suite door when she woke up, and outside whatever room she was in when she was in it, and she adapted to this with a pragmatism that surprised her and probably shouldn't have. She had learned efficiency in more difficult circumstances than this. She kept working. The new client project kept her at the drafting table for most of Saturday and Sunday, and the focused work had its usual effect of compressing her awareness down to the task in front of her, narrowing the world to paper and line and the problem of making something true from materials. On Sunday night, Dante came and stood in the doorway of her studio space and looked at the board she had up and said nothing for a long moment. "How are you?" he said. She looked at him from the table. He was in a shirt with the sleeves rolled, holding a glass of water, and he looked tired in a way she didn't see on him often. He was very good at not showing fatigue. 4 days ago, I would have said better than I've been in years, she said. Right now, I'm about even. I'm sorry for this. Stop apologizing and come look at this color variation. She turned the board toward him. I can't decide if the secondary is right. He came in and looked at it and said, the one on the left, without hesitation. That's what I thought. You always pick the one on the left. It's usually right. She looked at him then, really looked, the way she'd been careful not to do too directly, because direct looking led to the feeling she wasn't naming. He was looking at the board. His profile in the work light from the north window had the particular quality of a person at rest, which was the rarest version of him. The meeting, she said. On Wednesday. Will it work? He looked at her then too. I believe so. That's not a yes. No, he said. It's not. He set the glass down on the edge of the drafting table and straightened. I have spent 8 months building leverage for this meeting. Reyes operates on respect and calculated self-interest. I'm offering him something that costs me considerably, but costs him nothing, and it guarantees his operation a stability he won't get if the alternative is an escalation he can't control. He paused. He's not irrational, just ruthless. And if he's in a ruthless mood on Wednesday, then we manage what comes next. He said it simply, like managing what came next was a logistical problem and not a thing that could involve their bodies in harm's way. She found it both infuriating and steadying. She turned back to the boards. Okay? Okay, he said. He picked up his glass. Left one. I heard you the first time. Wednesday came with the particular gray efficiency of a New York November morning that had no interest in providing atmosphere. Dante left before 7 with 2 members of his security team. He did not tell her the location of the meeting. She did not ask. They had reached a functional agreement about what she needed to know, and what operational details served no useful purpose for her, and it held between them like a line they'd drawn together. She worked. She was through the first revision cycle on the new project by 10 and into the detail work by noon. Carver was outside the suite. The building was quiet in the specific way of places where the people inside are managing something. At 2:17 p.m., her phone rang. Not Dante. A woman's voice she didn't recognize. Emma Rossi. Yes, who is, listen carefully. The meeting on Wednesday is not what Dante believes it to be. Reyes accepted the terms. He also made a separate arrangement. A pause. They're not coming for Dante. They're coming for you. Emma's hand tightened on the phone. Who is this? Someone who owed him a debt and has now repaid it. Get out of that building, Emma. Do not take the elevator. Do not use the lobby. You have a pause, brief and sharp. Less than an hour. The call ended. Emma stood with the phone in her hand and her heart making itself known in her throat. She had 12 seconds of fear. She knew this because she counted, without planning to, and at 12 she stopped counting and moved. She went to the suite door and opened it. Carver was there. I need you to contact Dante, she said. Her voice came out level. She was filing that away to be impressed by later. Right now. Tell him the meeting is a diversion. Tell him Reyes has people coming here. Carver looked at her for exactly 1 second. When did you get that information? Phone call 2 minutes ago. Woman didn't give a name. She knew specifics. He had his radio out before she finished talking. She heard him speak in the clipped, compressed language of someone communicating urgency without broadcasting it. We're moving you to the safe room, he said. Where is it? Follow me. She followed. The safe room was behind the wall of the study on the northeast corner of the penthouse. She had been in that room a dozen times and never seen the door, which was the point. Carver moved a section of built-in shelving with a mechanism she'd never have found without being shown, and beyond it was a room maybe 12 by 15, with its own ventilation, a steel door that locked from the inside with 3 separate mechanisms, and a bank of monitors along one wall showing feeds from every camera in and around the building. She went in. He handed her a phone. The secondary, hard-lined, encrypted, the number she'd need already programmed. Dante is being reached, he said. He's 20 minutes out. You do not leave this room unless I open that door myself, or unless you hear my specific confirmation phrase, which is, he said 3 words she repeated back to him, on any other voice or any other instruction, you stay inside. Understood. Do you understand what I'm saying? Carver, I understand. She held his eyes. Go. He went. The door sealed. The 3 locks engaged with sounds that were deeply, mechanically final. She sat down in front of the monitors and breathed and looked at the feeds. The building looked normal. The lobby camera showed the front desk, 2 visible security staff, the marble floor. The street cameras showed the block, traffic, pedestrians, the ordinary rhythm of a Wednesday afternoon. The parking garage camera showed the cars in their orderly rows. She watched. For 11 minutes, nothing happened. Then the garage camera showed a van. It pulled in at 2:47 with the deliberate, unhurried pace of something that had planned its arrival. And when it stopped and the side door opened, she counted 4 men before the angle shifted. Her phone, the encrypted one, buzzed. Dante. Are you in the safe room? Not a question. Yes. I'm watching the garage. There's a van, 4 men that I can see. I know. I'm 9 minutes out. His voice was the controlled version, the one without variance, which told her he was in the car moving fast and working to keep everything below the surface. Emma, listen to me. You stay in that room. Whatever you hear, whatever the monitors show, you stay in. Where's Carver? Carver and the team are handling the building. I have 2 more in the car with me. 9 minutes. A pause, almost too short to hear. I'm coming. I know, she said. The call stayed open. She watched the monitors. The 4 men from the van moved through the garage with the efficiency of people who had studied the layout. They were not chaotic. That was the thing that frightened her most. The absence of chaos, the purposeful geometry of their movement, the way they communicated with hand signals and spread without crowding. These were not impulsive people. These were people who had done this before. The lobby camera showed movement. One of her security team stepping away from the desk toward the garage entrance. She watched him move, and then she watched the lobby, and for 30 seconds, nothing happened. Then the power went. Not everything. The monitors stayed up, running on the safe room's independent circuit, but the lobby camera went to emergency lighting, and the floor camera feeds for 3 and 4 went dark. She gripped the edge of the console and breathed. On the monitors, she could still see garage, the van, 2 men now visible outside it. Roof, clear. Lobby, emergency light. 1 security figure, something happening at the far edge of the frame she couldn't resolve. The encrypted phone, Dante. Power's out on 3 and 4 feeds, she said. I know. Keep watching the lobby camera. Tell me if anyone comes through the stairwell door. How far? 6 minutes. She watched. The stairwell door on the lobby camera was in the upper left of the frame, a fire door gray rectangle. She fixed her eyes on it and kept them there. 2 minutes. 3. The door opened. 2 men. Not Carver, not anyone she recognized, moving low and fast toward the lobby desk. Stairwell, 2 coming through into the lobby. She heard sounds from the phone, movement, rapid exchange in the car, and then Dante's voice. Carver has them. Stay in the room. She stayed in the room. What followed was 8 minutes that she would spend years afterward refusing to describe in detail because the sequence of it, the sounds she could hear through the walls, even through the safe room's insulation, the shapes that moved across the edges of functional camera feeds. The 2 minutes when the encrypted phone went silent and she sat in the sealed room with her hands flat on her thighs and the specific cold terror of not knowing was not a thing she had the vocabulary for yet. She had lived a small and careful life inside a small and carefully maintained idea of how the world worked, and in those 8 minutes that idea was dismantled completely, and she sat in its wreckage and breathed. The phone came back. Emma, Dante's voice. Different now. Something in it that hadn't been there before. Rougher at the edges, like something had gotten past the controlled surface. Talk to me. I'm here. Her voice didn't shake. She was still filing that away. Are you? I'm in the building, coming up. She heard the elevator. Are you injured? No, I'm fine. Are you? I'll be there in 30 seconds. She heard the confirmation phrase before the door opened. She heard it from Carver's voice first, and then the locks disengaged. 1, 2, 3, and the door opened and Dante was there. He was not undamaged. His jacket was gone. There was a cut along his left jaw that was still deciding how seriously to bleed, and he was breathing harder than she'd ever seen him breathe, and his eyes when they found her had an expression she had never seen on him before and couldn't name, except that it was the expression of a person looking at something they had nearly lost and had not. She stood up. He crossed the room in 3 steps, and his hands came to her face, both of them, cupping her jaw, tilting her face up, checking her the way you check something you were afraid would be broken. His hands were not entirely steady. You're not hurt, he said. It wasn't a question this time either, but a different kind. The kind you say out loud so the fact of it becomes real. I'm not hurt. She put her hands over his. Dante, look at me. I'm not hurt. He looked at her. The room was very quiet except for their breathing. His and hers, finding the same rhythm gradually, the way 2 things settle toward each other. He said nothing for a moment. Then, they're gone, all 4, either detained or withdrawn. The building is secured. He breathed. Reyes will not now, she said. Tell me later. He nodded. His hands were still on her face. She left hers over his. I need to say something to you, he said. Dante, Emma. His voice broke on her name slightly, just slightly, enough for her to understand that it cost him something to let it. I almost brought something terrible into your life. You didn't. The risk was, you came back in 9 minutes, she said. Don't explain the math to me. You came back. He looked at her, and she looked at him, 41 floors above a city that had never once adjusted itself for anyone's private story. And in the wreckage of the evening, and the adrenaline still moving through both their bodies, and the particular quality of a silence that comes after something that could have been catastrophic, and wasn't. Something shifted between them that had been shifting for months and finally landed. He lowered his forehead to hers. She let him. They stood like that for a moment that had no use for words, and outside the penthouse, Manhattan did its indifferent, luminous thing, burning in the dark the way it always burned, as if it knew that some stories required the full weight of the city as witness. Then Dante straightened. He looked at her with something clear and unguarded in his expression, the version of him with no strategy in it. Emma Rossi, he said, and his voice was steady now, or close to it, or choosing to be. I have something to ask you, and I am asking it now, in this room, while we are both still covered in the evidence that I nearly made the worst mistake of my life, Because I don't want to wait for a better moment. Because you deserve to hear it in the real moment, not the managed one. She was very still. He took her hands, both of them, not the gesture of a man who rehearsed things, the gesture of a man who had stopped rehearsing entirely. Will you? He began, and the encrypted phone on the console lit up, and Carver's voice came through with a damage assessment, and Emma watched Dante's jaw tighten as he registered the interruption, and the question hung in the air between them, unfinished, its weight more present for being incomplete. And Emma Rossi stood in a sealed room 41 floors above the city, holding the hands of a man who had come back in 9 minutes and thought, whatever comes next, whatever he is about to ask, whatever the answer costs her, she already knows what it is. Carver's voice on the encrypted phone lasted 4 minutes. Emma stood and listened to Dante's side of it, the compressed operational language of a man receiving a damage report and processing it in real time. 2 of Reyes's men had been detained in the parking garage by building security and would be handed to a federal contact Dante had apparently been cultivating for precisely this category of eventuality. The other 2 had withdrawn when the lobby breach failed. The building's main power would be restored within the hour. No civilian casualties. 2 of Dante's security team with injuries, neither critical. She listened to all of this and watched Dante's face as he received it. The way the operational mode gradually released its grip on his features. The way his shoulders descended by approximately 1 centimeter as each piece of information resolved into something manageable. She had learned to read him in increments. She was getting good at it. He set the phone down. The 2 detained, she said. Will they talk? To the right people, eventually. He looked at her. Reyes will know by morning that this went wrong in a specific way that implicates his own planning. The federal contact has been building a case. This gives them something to build with. Is it enough? It will be. He said it the way he said things he had examined from every angle and arrived at through evidence rather than hope. Reyes is not irrational. I told you that. An irrational man doubles down when something fails. A calculating man looks at the math. The math, as of tonight, tells him that I am more expensive to fight than to leave alone. Emma looked at the monitors. The lobby camera showed the emergency lighting giving way to the full system coming back online, the marble floor reasserting itself in proper illumination, the front desk reoccupied, the ordinary architecture of the building restoring itself around the evidence of what had happened. You've been managing this for 8 months, she said. Yes. Alone. With my team. Without telling anyone who was actually in your life. He was quiet for a moment. There wasn't anyone in my life to tell. Before. She looked at him. The cut on his jaw had stopped bleeding and was darkening into something that would be ugly by morning. His shirt had a tear along the left shoulder she hadn't noticed in the first minute. His hands, when he'd held her face, had been the hands of someone who carried weight in them all the time and had learned to make it invisible. Sit down, she said. Emma, Dante. Sit down and let me look at your face. He sat. She found the first aid kit behind a panel in the safe room. Of course there was one. Of course everything in this room had been thought through. And she sat across from him and cleaned the cut with the specificity of someone who was using the task to organize herself. He sat still and let her, which told her something about the version of him that existed when the operational mode was fully released. This needs a proper look, she said, when we're out of here. It's fine. You sound like me. The corner of his mouth moved. She pressed gauze against the cut perhaps more firmly than necessary. He didn't flinch. You were going to ask me something, she said. He looked at her. His eyes, at this distance in the low light of the safe room, had the quality of someone who had stopped performing the version of himself that moved through rooms without needing anything. I was, he said. Ask me. He was quiet for a moment that was different from his other silences. Not the thinking silence, not the listening silence, but the silence of a man standing at the edge of something and deciding whether the ground on the other side will hold. Marry me, he said. Not performed, not rehearsed, just said, the way you say a true thing when you finished finding reasons not to. Emma sat with the gauze in her hand and looked at him. Dante, not because of tonight, not because of the fear or the adrenaline, or the proximity of something terrible. He held her gaze. Because you walked into a room 4 months ago and fell, and I caught you, and in the time since then I have watched you take a marriage that was designed to reduce you and dismantle it without losing a single piece of yourself. I have watched you build something extraordinary in a folder called Someday. I have watched you become someone who stands in rooms the right size. He paused. I want to build a life with that person. I want to be the one who is there for the next chapter of it. Not because you need me to be, because I want to. Emma looked at him for a long time. The safe room was quiet. The monitor showed a building returning to normal. Outside the sealed door, she could hear the faint sounds of Carver coordinating, of the ordinary machinery of the night resuming. I am a person, she said carefully, who just finalized a divorce 4 weeks ago, who spent 3 years becoming invisible inside someone else's life, who is only beginning to understand what it feels like to take up the right amount of space. She held his eyes. I need you to understand that when I say yes, I am saying it as that person, not as someone who has been rescued, not as someone who needs to be held together, as someone who is choosing. He didn't move. I understand that. You have to be sure you understand it. Emma. His voice was quiet and even, and the most honest thing she'd ever heard from anyone. You are the least rescuable person I have ever met. That is not an insult. That is the specific thing about you that I am asking to spend my life next to. She sat with that. Then she said, yes. He breathed. Just that. One full breath, in and out, the specific exhale of someone who had been holding something for a very long time. She pressed the gauze back against his jaw. We're getting that looked at, she said. Yes, he said. They did not announce it. The decision. She thought of it that way, as a decision rather than an event, because that framing belonged to her and she was keeping it, lived between them for several weeks, in the particular way of things that don't need witnesses to be real. Carver noticed first, or showed that he'd noticed, by a slight adjustment in his professional demeanor that communicated nothing verbally and everything atmospherically. Claire from the Vela team noticed second and said nothing except to invite Emma to a dinner meeting she'd previously been excluded from, which was its own kind of language. Sophie noticed the morning Emma came to the Hell's Kitchen to help with a weekend prep and set her bag down, and Sophie looked at her face for 3 full seconds and said, "Oh, don't. I'm not doing anything." "You're doing the face." "I'm allowed to do the face. I'm your sister." Sophie handed her an apron. "When?" "When what?" "Emma." Emma tied the apron. "We're not rushing anything. That's not what I asked. Spring, maybe. Small. Nobody we don't actually need in the room." Sophie was quiet for a moment. Then she made a sound that was not quite crying and not quite laughing, and was instead the precise frequency of an older sister who has watched someone she loves come back from a long way away. "Sophie, I'm fine. I'm chopping. This is onion. There are no onions in front of you?" "There will be." Emma laughed. It was the real kind. The kind that starts in the chest rather than being manufactured at the face. Sophie heard the difference and nodded without looking up, and they worked side by side in the kitchen for 2 hours and talked about nothing important and everything true. The divorce was finalized on a Thursday in December. Emma went to the courthouse with Diane Voss and signed her name 3 times on documents that represented the legal dissolution of something that had been ending for longer than she'd let herself know. Marco was represented by his attorney. She did not see him. She had not seen him since the afternoon in the Chelsea apartment, the signed document on the coffee table, his face doing its rapid recalculation. She did not feel the things she'd expected to feel. She'd anticipated grief, or the ghost of it, some remnant of the person who had sat at that kitchen table drinking cold coffee and waiting for a man to come back who had already left. Instead, she felt a specific clean quality of completion. The thing was done. The 3 years had a final shape now, and that shape included what she'd learned inside them, including what she'd survived, including the folder called Someday that she had reopened, and the career that was building itself into something she could stand in without shrinking, and the man with a scar on his jaw who asked questions and waited for the answers. She took the subway home. Not a car, not a cab. The F train from the downtown stop, standing in the car with her coat and her bag and her newly singular legal name, and she watched the tunnel go by through the window, and she thought about the 22-year-old who had sketched characters with whole histories into a notebook and believed, for a brief window, that the world she was building in her own head was worth something. She pulled out her phone and opened the folder. The graphic novel was 7 pages further along than it had been 6 months ago. It had a name now. She had given it one 2 weeks ago without ceremony, at 2 in the morning, when the right words had simply arrived. Cartography of the known world. A woman who mapped places that didn't exist yet. It was not subtle. She liked it anyway. She added a panel note from the subway, her thumb moving across the screen while the train moved through the dark, and she thought, someday is a terrible name for a folder. She would rename it when she got home. The Reyes matter resolved itself in the first week of January in the way Dante had predicted. Not with drama, but with math. 2 federal indictments, one of which incorporated the testimony of the men detained in the parking garage. Reyes's organization, faced with the structural cost of an extended conflict on 2 fronts, made the calculation Dante had always believed they would make. An intermediary contacted Dante's attorney with terms for a mutual disengagement that were, as Dante put it over dinner the night he told her, everything I asked for 8 months ago, delivered via a process that cost everyone approximately 4 times what it needed to. So it's over, Emma said. The immediate situation? Yes. And the broader situation? He looked at her across the table. I have been moving the company toward structures that don't require those relationships. That work will take another 2 to 3 years to complete. He paused. I wanted you to know the honest timeline. She nodded. I appreciate that. I'm going to get it wrong sometimes, he said. The telling you things. I have operated alone for a long time, and the instinct to manage information rather than share it it's a habit I'm working on. I wanted to say that directly. Emma looked at him. I know. She picked up her fork. I'll tell you when you're doing it. That seems fair? It is fair. She met his eyes. We're going to be honest with each other, even when it's uncomfortable. That is the one thing I will not negotiate. He held her gaze without flinching. Agreed. Good. She went back to the food. The fish is perfect, by the way. I ordered it. I know you ordered it. I said it was perfect, not that you made it. Something about his expression in that moment, the particular combination of amusement and recognition, the specific quality of a man seeing himself accurately in someone else's words, was the version of him she loved most. She had started using that word internally, without fanfare, the way you start using the right name for a thing once you've stopped being afraid of what it means. They married in April. Small was the word she'd used with Sophie, and she kept to it. 12 people in a room in a building in the West Village that belonged to a friend of Dante's, a restored space with plaster walls and wood floors and light from high windows that had the quality of somewhere that had been waiting for something to happen in it. Sophie did the food. Carver stood near the back wall in civilian clothes, and she caught his eye at one point during the evening, and he gave her a nod that was the most formal version of warmth she had ever received. There was no ceremony in the traditional sense. They had gone to the clerk's office 3 days before, quietly, with Sophie and one of Dante's associates as witnesses, and signed the documents and walked out into a clear April morning as married people. The gathering on the Saturday was the other thing. The room and the food and the people and the acknowledgement between the 2 of them and the 12 people they trusted most that something had been built here and deserved to be stood in together. Dante did not give a speech. He was not a speech person, and she loved that about him. He held her hand during the dinner, and when someone made a toast, he looked at her rather than at the person speaking, which was the most romantic thing she had seen in her life. And she told him so later, and he said, I'll remember that for the future. And she laughed. Sophie cried during the toast. She was not apologetic about it. Emma did not cry. She had cried enough. She had used up the crying in Sophie's bathroom and in a sublet in Carroll Gardens and in a safe room 41 floors above the city on a Wednesday afternoon that had tried to take everything. What she felt on this particular Saturday in April was not the soft, manageable emotion of a person experiencing a happy occasion. It was something older and more specific, the feeling of having gone a long way through difficult country and arrived somewhere solid, the feeling of ground under her feet after a long time of uncertain footing. She held Dante's hand and sat in the room and let it be real. She found out about the pregnancy on a Tuesday in June. She sat on the edge of the bathtub for 6 minutes with the test in her hand, and then she went out to the main room where Dante was at his desk with his laptop. And she stood in the doorway, and he looked up and read her face in the way he had become extraordinary at doing. He put the laptop down. He did not say anything yet. She crossed the room and handed him the test. He looked at it. He looked at her. The expression on his face moved through several phases without settling anywhere that had a common name. Not surprise exactly, not just happiness, something larger and less categorizable, the expression of a person being given something they had not known how to want until it was in their hands. "Emma," he said. Her name in his voice at that particular frequency, the one that meant all registers of the word at once. "I know," she said. He set the test down on the desk and stood up and held her the way he had in the safe room, both arms, complete, not the preliminary hug of social occasions, but the real thing, the hug of someone who understood what they were holding. She put her face against his shoulder. Outside the penthouse windows, Manhattan was doing its June thing, luminous and relentless, the skyline refracting the afternoon light in the particular way of a city that believes in its own permanence. She had stood at those windows and learned to not flinch. She had learned to look at the height in the distance without the animal need to step back. "I'm terrified," she said into his shoulder. "I know," he said. "I'm also—" She stopped. "I know that too." She laughed once, short and real. He tightened his arms. They stood like that for a while. The city burned and hummed and carried on with its own enormous life, the way it always did, indifferent and magnificent. And inside it, in a room above the skyline, two people held each other with the particular quality of people who have come through enough to understand that ordinary moments are not ordinary at all. The Cartography of the Known World was published the following spring as a limited edition graphic novel through an independent press that had been pursuing Emma since the Vela identity work made her name circulate in the right rooms. It was 240 pages. It had taken her 18 months from the first fully committed page to the final proof correction worked on in the early hours before the city was fully awake. At the drafting table in the corner of the studio she had built inside the east wing of the penthouse, when the guest suite had become permanently hers in all the ways that mattered. The reviews, when they came, used words like intricate and emotionally precise, and a debut that reads like the work of someone who has been building toward it for years. One review said, "Rossi draws her protagonist as if she is mapping a country that has never been mapped before, because the cartographer is also, for the first time, paying attention to where she actually stands." Emma read that one twice. She did not frame it. She did not need to. She knew what it meant and where it came from and what it had cost to arrive at the place from which she could make a thing like that. And that knowledge lived in her body rather than on her wall. The morning the review came out, Dante found her at the drafting table before 6, already working on something new, the graphite moving in the steady, sure lines of someone who no longer needed to decide whether she was allowed to take up space. He set a coffee on the table beside her. She looked up. "You saw it," she said. "I saw it." "And?" He looked at the lines she was drawing. His face had the expression she had catalogued and loved. The attentive, non-performing version, the one with no strategy. "It's accurate," he said. She looked back at the page. "It is." She kept drawing. He stood there for a moment, and she knew without looking that he was doing what he often did in those early mornings, standing in the good light of the studio and watching her work with the specific expression of someone who understood that watching someone be entirely themselves was its own form of being home. Then he went to make his calls. The daughter was born in November. They had not discussed names at length. She had expected that to be a longer conversation, and it wasn't. One evening in August, Dante had said, without particular ceremony, "Mara," and Emma had looked up from her book and turned the word over and felt it settle, and said, "Yes," and that was all that was required. Mara Valente arrived with a full set of opinions that she communicated at significant volume. and dark eyes that in the first weeks Emma found herself examining with the slightly overwhelmed precision of a person who has been handed something they can't fully believe is real. She had Dante's mouth in Emma's hands and an expression, in her more philosophical moments, that suggested she was thinking about something considerably beyond her immediate circumstances. Sophie came the day after and stood in the doorway of the hospital room and looked at Emma in the bed and Dante in the chair beside her with Mara against his chest. And Sophie's face did everything faces can do in a short space of time, and she came in and sat on the edge of the bed and took Emma's hand and didn't say anything for a while. "She's got your hands," Sophie said finally. "I know. And his chin. Don't tell him. His ego doesn't need it." "I heard that," Dante said without opening his eyes. "You were supposed to." Mara made a sound. Dante adjusted his arm with the automatic precision of someone who had been practicing it for 48 hours and already understood more than he was letting on. Sophie watched him do it. "He's good at that," Sophie said quietly. "I know," Emma said. The hospital room was small, and the light in it was the flat institutional kind that has no opinion about the significance of occasions. Outside the window, the November sky was doing what it did. Low and gray and indifferent, the city going about its particular enormous life without reference to the people inside this room, which is how it always was and how it always would be. Emma held Sophie's hand and watched Dante hold their daughter and felt the full weight of the last 18 months settle into her bones in the way that things only settle when they're finally real. The Chelsea apartment and the cracked tile and the cold coffee and the Sunday speech. Fulton Street and the hand. The manila folder and Diane Voss's fountain pen. The safe room and the encrypted phone and 8 minutes she refused to describe. A folder called Someday that was now a book with her name on the cover. A man with a scar on his jaw who asked questions and waited for the answers. She thought about the woman who had stood on a Chelsea sidewalk in November air with her keys in her hand and no idea yet what was on the other side of the door she was about to open. She thought, I would go through all of it again. Not because it hadn't cost anything, it had cost everything, the way real things do, but because the woman who had come through the other side of it was someone she recognized, someone who took up the right amount of space, someone who knew the difference between waiting and choosing, and chose. Mara made another sound. This one was different from the others. Dante opened his eyes and looked down at her. "Hey," he said softly. Just that. The most unguarded word she'd ever heard from him, spoken to a person 6 pounds and 3 days old who had already changed the specific weight of every room she entered. Emma watched his face. She thought, here, this specific room, this specific light, this specific moment in November when the city outside was going on without them, and didn't need to know what was happening in here, because what was happening in here was entirely, completely, self-sufficiently enough. Here was the country she had been mapping all along. She just hadn't known yet what it was called. She knew now. It was called this. It was called exactly this. Sophie squeezed her hand once and didn't say anything, because Sophie knew when silence was the more useful thing, and Emma leaned back against the pillow and breathed. And outside the window, the city burned with its usual conviction that light was always worth the effort. And in the room, the 3 of them, the 4 of them, were quiet together in the way of people who have arrived somewhere real and do not need it to be anything other than what it is. The end.